Thank you, God, for this life. Happy Sunday. Most people will never experience real power. You know why? Because they don't even know what it looks like. Because they are asleep when it is being built. Because most people are asleep in their own systems. So that's right. If you're here with me at 4 a.m., especially on a Sunday, yeah, you're already ahead. But don't get it twisted. Being awake does not mean you are aligned. Working hard ain't the same as building power. Grinding. Grinding ain't the same as growing. So today, let's talk about the trap you didn't even know you were in. Let's talk about the lie they dressed up like discipline. Let's talk about the grind. Let's kill the lie. Grinding does not equal execution. Busy does not equal building. Tired does not equal trusted by God. They sold you sweat like it was salvation. I'll say it again. They sold you sweat like it was salvation. Told you the grind was holy, that exhaustion was evidence, and you should wear it on your face. But here's the truth. You're not being promoted. You are being bled dry, and they're taking you for all you got. Because motion without measurement is the first step towards self-erasure. And the system is counting on you to never question it. We got to break this down. Grinding. Such a popular word, especially in my culture. I think in all culture. Grinding, here's what it equals. Grinding equals friction without forward motion. Growth. Growth equals movement that multiplies. Grind, all hands, no hierarchy, no leverage, just labor. High motion, zero multiplication. Growth. Growth is strategic system design, compounding energy, intentional rest, tactical movement. Built to outlive you. And here's the dagger straight in your soul. Feel this one. Grinding is rooted in fear. Growth is built on faith. One requires you to die for the work. The other lets your work live without you. You want to see what this looks like in a metaphor? You want some visual stimulus for the brain on a Sunday? 4:05 a.m. We call this one the treadmill versus the tower. Picture this, immerse yourself. This is probably you. You're on a treadmill. You are drenched in sweat, sprinting full speed, heart pounding, legs screaming. People walk by. Everybody's looking at you. Yo, my G, you putting in the work. But look down while you're moving so fast and so hard on that treadmill. You haven't moved an inch. That is the grind. Now picture this instead. You're lifting bricks, heavy, slow, deliberate, each one placed with intention. Some days it's heavy, some days it hurts, but over time, you step back and there is a tower behind you, built from your blueprint, rising without rush. And one day, it stands tall enough without you ever touching it again. That is growth. The grind makes you sweat. The growth gives you a structure. One breaks your body, the other builds your legacy. So if you're sweating but standing still, welcome to the treadmill. Welcome to the illusion. Welcome to being owned by the system you never questioned. Are you running the system, or is the system running you? I'm going to give you personal perspective. I want to make sure we get some things clear. Personally, I never bought into the whole burnout narrative. Not because I didn't feel pressure, but because where I'm from, how I was raised in my culture, burnout is just sort of standard operating procedure. My grandfather, I don't give him enough love here. He was the original hustler in my eyes. Unofficial cab driver, VHS bootlegger, trunk hustler, all at once. If he was outside, he was making something move. ROI wasn't optional, it was survival. He was always getting it. He was always, I call him jefe, which in Spanish, it means boss. El jefe, the block taught me the same thing. Everybody was either trying to move something or get something. You were either a provider or a consumer. And I just knew off the rip right away early, I never wanted to be a consumer. I had addicts. I watched addicts in my own family chase the system like it was God. And I thought, because I watched it, it looks crazy. What does it feel like to have that kind of pull on somebody? That kind of power, that kind of influence? I realized I didn't want the high. Not in that way. I wanted to be the high. Big difference. I didn't want to push a product. I wanted to become the product. Not for money. Not for movement. My belief, that is purpose. That is power. And so now, as I stand here today, I'm not chasing validation. I'm not grinding for scraps. I scaled the hustle into a system. I turned survival into multiplication because God made me the product, and a product backed by God. That is infinite inventory. Do you see the difference? Do you see the difference? Because that is the law. That's the system we live in. This is the provider versus consumer law. You can't be both. You're one or the other. You're providing or you're consuming. You're either chasing the high or you are the high. You're either pushing somebody else's product or you become the product. There's a system. There's a system inside the do you rules. And we break it down like this. Here's our system explanation. There's 4 R's. The do you rules. Turns out there's 4 R's to this. This, of course, is execution law. Grinders. Every grinder is stuck at level 1. To evolve, you must move from these 4 levels respectively. And trust me, we've all been at one or the other at some point. Level 1 is the runner. This is hands-on keyboard, all motion, no vision. Emotion is identity. You can't delegate. It's only survival. Grinders are only surviving all the time, on the block, on the corner, hands on keyboard. Level 2 is the responder. They give direction. They live in reaction, never responding. They might lead tasks, but not systems. They run the risk of becoming a permanent manager in somebody else's structure. Then there's level 3, the route setter. Designs the system, delegates, seeks alignment because they know the build will collapse otherwise. They're an architect, but still vulnerable to burnout if not spiritually secured. Think about the mask we talked about yesterday. Moving so hard in one direction, you forget everything else because you're not to level 4 yet. Level 4 is the root source. You become the system. You now have infinite value. It's divine backed. Operates from peace, not pressure. God is root. Faith is code. Honor is security. Loyalty is firewall. You don't level up. You delegate up. Big difference. Until you become the root source of your role, you're still replaceable. Let that sit and marinate. The 4 R's. This is so important. Let's check the chat. Who's with me at 412 on a Sunday? The day of traditional faith. Are you a runner, a responder, a route setter, or are you the root source? I'm going to give you another metaphor here in a moment, tied into the text, the book, give you a God story. But there's one thing I don't want to be misconstrued, and I think it's awfully difficult, particularly when you consider being introduced into systems the way I was. If it wasn't clear, I will never sell you any sort of fallacy towards any sort of completion. You certainly can't get to root. You will not get level 4. If there's runners, responders, route setters, and then the root, route setters, and then the root. Massive work. Massive amount of work. Intense amount of work. Never-ending work. The scale at root source, which I believe I'm root in a lot of ways. When you remove your hands from the keyboard and always doing the actual work, and you start to see all the work that goes into the work that eventually puts somebody's hands on the keyboard, that's why we talk strategic vision, tactical vision, operational vision, innovation, all these iterative processes. You cannot evolve at scale. There is no evolution at root source level until you're all encompassing. That means you can see what the runner does. You can see what the responder does, the route setter as the root. And so now you're positioning constantly your own internal system to delegate up and delegate down, mind, body, and spirit, through your codes, God, faith, honor, loyalty, managing your internal relationship. You think this is just like, oh, this is cool. It sounds good. Motivation, inspiration. Oh, no, the math on this is massive. The power associated with root source is never ending. This is why people, when you ascend even in business, you question, you see people walking, they look like empty suits. They go into the boardroom, they get the breakfast delivered, there's sandwiches and croissants and there's orange juice and coffee, and you're looking like, oh, these people ain't doing nothing. They may not be doing nothing the way you're doing something, but they're worried about everything. And that level of pressure at root source is far more than you can fathom, especially if you've just been a runner your entire life. The step back in order to step forward is massively intense. Let me get to what I want to drive, though. You got to work massively hard, inclusive of when you're elevating yourself towards root, you got to put your own hands on the keyboard at some times. At some time. That's the substance. That's the substance. That's what allows you to become root. Because as root, how do I identify who can be a runner for me while we build systems? Systems need everything to interoperate. It's because I put my hands on keyboard and I know what it takes at that level. I've picked up the gun. I fired it. Another analogy. You can't go from runner to responder until you're the best possible runner you can be. And you can also be a runner at the root level. When I ascended into my elevation with God and knowing that he's my supporter, you think I'm the first one to do this? No, there's no naivete there. So imagine me walking into a room with other root source people. That's what I'm talking about. You reach the level of runner, right? I'm the hardest working runner. The room of runners is massive. It's big. Level 1, tier 1, the way we are introduced, right? Imagine the hood. It's all runners because it's all survival all the time. I talked about it yesterday. You can't see the root because you're too busy just trying to get by. That's the hands-on keyboard worker. That's the entry-level position. They put you, they inundate you. There's all this work. It's keeping you occupied. It's keeping you busy. You think you're moving. You're going nowhere. You went somewhere to get there because you had the right intention. I got to go be a runner. I got to go get this job. I got to go get this relationship. I got to go start these connections. But you never move past the hands-on keyboard level. You never promote or elevate or get even to a responder because you can't see what goes on outside of that level. Why? You don't work hard enough to ascend. You can't avoid the work in this. You got to be the hardest possible worker you can be. Imagine that when you elevate, the rooms get smaller. So I outwork the room to get to the next room. The first room filled with runners is massively big. How do you get recognized in a room full of runners? They're everywhere. They're everywhere. I was reading something that's crazy. Ants, stay with me, right? The way that they create collective consciousness and that they build, it's crazy. They are assigned and delegated roles. Some are just soldiers, some are builders. How do you become the queen? How do you become the queen that delegates? All these little ants doing all these little things. How does one stand out? Their code, their DNA, their root is the highest. The highest rooted ant becomes the queen. Here's the killer. Here's the killer. You're like, Jeff, you're going crazy. I know. Every ant has the same root source, which means at any point, any ant could actually be the queen in the way that if they were to just release the root in them, everybody would follow. And in that way, every now and again, if a queen dies or something, there's some sort of friction, the colony breaks up, there is an ant who might step up and say, okay, I'll be the queen. And everybody would just follow. Why? Because their root comes to the surface. If not, they're just a worker or a soldier. Everybody wants to be the queen. Not everybody can. But once identified, everybody knows I got to fall in line and do my job. Where are you in the pecking order of your life? Everybody has a pecking order of your life. I talked about it in one of my previous episodes. In business, leadership, they're always assessing and evaluating people. Why? Because if I am, think about it like this. If I want to be a responder, which is the next level up from the runner, and I have my eyes on being a route setter because I want to be the root, how do I get there? Once I ascend to responder, I need to identify somebody who's a good runner. I talked about succession plans. That's why we build networks. That's why we also delegate our own internal processes to God. We have faith. I got to move. I got to move. Why? God will surround me with the right crew. You cannot elevate the grind. There's a difference. There has to be growth in your grind. You can't just turn the wheel, run on the treadmill and go nowhere. But you can't avoid the work. You don't just say, oh, I'm going to be the root. And you think you release all authority in a way that suggests there's no more work to do. You are bugging. You're bugging. It'll never happen. That's why I caution you to ask the question, how far do you really want to take this thing? How far do you really want to take this thing? It's the same thing in business. You think you want a seat at the table. You think you want to stand out on the block until you stand out. You think you want to stand out in the crowd until you stand out. The pressure that comes with that, the grind can blind you in a way that emotionally satisfies you because it just gives you busyness in a way that allows you to ignore your possibility for root. Every ant has the root in them. Only one becomes the queen. It's Sunday, 421. I'm where I said I would be. Excuse me. Let's talk about Uzzah and the ark when good intentions get you killed, right? David was transporting the Ark of Covenant, the most sacred object in Israel. The ark represented God's presence, power, and divinity. So, of course, they wanted to protect it. Here's the kicker. They ain't follow God's instructions. Instead of carrying it the prescribed way on poles by priests, there were rules. They loaded it on a cart pulled by oxen. I get the logic. It's a shortcut. There's speed, efficiency, the grind. Then the oxen stumbled, the cart shook, and a man named Uzzah reached out to steady the ark. It's a natural reaction. All of us would probably do that. Just trying to help, just trying to protect the vision, just doing the right thing. But the second he touched it, God struck him down, dead. You hear that? What's the lesson? Think about this. It wasn't about intention. It was about execution and alignment. You could be working hard, doing the right thing, trying to carry the vision forward with your own hands. Oof. But if that's not how God told you to move, He'll shut it down. There's no reward for effort. Only for obedience to the design. You want the really real, raw and uncooked. Some of y'all out there like Uzzah right now, trying to hold God's purpose steady with your grind, especially on a Sunday. You lining up for that church, that prayer once a week. Some of you don't realize your hustle is hostile. And if you keep touching sacred things with unaligned hands, God's not going to bless it. He's going to bury it. Think about where you're at. What level are you on? How are you behaving in your life, reacting or responding? All things for us to consider. We're going to get into 3 levels of system separation, starting with the self. Hear this. Energy without direction is just noise. Most of us aren't lacking effort. We're lacking engineered effort. Your body's moving, but your system ain't. That's the first structure. You're burning energy you will never get back. We got to audit our calendars. We got to audit our energy. We got to ask, what is compounding and what is consuming me? Hear this too. You could be compounding what is consuming you, right? In a way that you think you're stacking wins, but like the treadmill, you're stacking and compounding on on friction that's pushing you backwards. What did we talk about yesterday? That you could actually push yourself away from your system because you could push yourself away from your future. We can't misconstrue physical action for actually elevating your system. We cannot. It's a big difference. You're compounding either way. Be careful what you compound. You feel what I'm saying to you? We're talking about the 3 levels of system separation. The second, of course, is faith. Your grind exposes who you really trust. Question for you. Is your work an act of obedience or fear wearing purpose's clothes? If God didn't assign it, why are you touching it? If you're forcing it, you're already off alignment. So ask yourself, am I building something that survives me or something that survives criticism? What truly are you doing and why? System separation. Network. You're only as scalable as your system. If everything breaks when you unplug, you never built a system. You just built a dependency trap. Some of us want control so bad. We want to feel like everything depends on us. Okay. Look at your circle. Look at your tech. Look at your team. If it doesn't multiply your mission, it's multiplying your madness. How do we become generationally cursed? How do we have these repetitive cycles? We're going to go into consequences because there's consequences. But consider how cultures are created. I keep trying to express this in a way that is digestible and relatable and everyday life-ish. The everyday person, like you go to the hood, the block, any environment, you go to a business, you watch a team the way it's structured. If you really just remove the emotion, everybody really is making moves. They're trying. You ask somebody, there isn't a man or woman, are you grinding? Yeah, I'm grinding. But then you ask, what are you getting for your grind? I've been journaling this a lot lately, excuse me. The idea that you could have been born a runner, and the difficulty is you lack exposure. And when you lack exposure, you lack the ability to see different possibilities. You see, I believe we get caught up in the trap and the illusion of success by watching how others tell us to do it in a way that exposes only the outcome, only the reward. It doesn't expose the iterative requirements to get from the levels that you're at to the levels you want to be at. And when we stop creating legacy that's scalable, this is why this is so important to me. When we stop being the root, we don't give our legacy a chance. And we're so inundated with trying to make sure we get it. There's a reality. I thought about this recently. What level of sacrifice are you willing to make? What about if I do this every day for the rest of my life and I don't quite get the reward I think I deserve or that I'm looking for? What would that mean? At minimum, I'm exposing my creation to the possibility of additional creation. Meaning I'm willing to sacrifice what I hope my family legacy is in a way that suggests I may never see the full fruit of it. That the abundance that comes at all levels, I've already, I believe, reached root internally, but it's only here. It hasn't manifested itself fully outward yet. It has to varying degrees. I feel very successful in my life, professionally, relationally, financially, and all these other areas. But there's massive room for growth. Massive, because why? It's infinite. In that way, I may never get there. So in that way, we become so selfish about our own grind. I might never see it. I might never see it. I might never see it. That you don't just elevate just a little bit for the sake of your legacy. How deep is your generational curse? At what point does somebody raise the bar just a little bit? Imagine that. Generation after generation after generation, and the bar is still in the same place. Nobody's hopped over the bar. Nobody has stretched the bar just a little bit. Why? Because we're selfish in that way. Oh, it's not going to work for us, so I don't want to do it. All right, then you're stunting the rest of your potentiality. Your name. Let's get into the consequences. Like I'm about to sneeze, but it's on the tip of my nose. Keep grinding with no growth, and it'll start to feel normal. Not fulfilling, just familiar. You'll wear exhaustion like a badge. But behind the badge is a man or woman who's quietly breaking. You'll get used to waking up tired. Not from purpose, but from proving you still matter. You'll lie to yourself that motion means movement until one day you realize you've only mastered how to survive a schedule. No structure, no system, no soul left in your grind. And here's the worst part. You won't get erased by the world. You will erase yourself slowly. How? One unspoken resentment, one missed mission, one forgotten divine assignment at a time. Because grinding doesn't build legacy. It just delays the collapse. Let's check the chat before I excuse myself for a moment here. 4:33 on a Sunday. Think about those words. Give me a moment. Ah. My blanket. Where would I be without my blanket? Imagine your grind is like a blanket. Can't move on without your blanket. I will say the weather's warming. It's beautiful yesterday. Seeing the sun, feeling the heat. I was out in a tank top for a little bit. I'll tell you what, any reason to wear a tank top, I'm out in a tank top. But the grind, it could be like your security blanket. I'll also say I'm over this cold, man. It was a cold winter. It was a cold, cold winter. Just like the grind gets cold. We're talking consequences. Let's start with the self, and how you will start to experience self-deletion. You burn out before the breakthrough. Grind long enough with no return, and you'll normalize self-sacrifice. You'll start believing you are strong for suffering, and that lie will keep you stuck. Your body breaks down, your mind fogs. You defend dysfunction as identity. And one day, you'll realize you weren't building, you were erasing yourself. Let's talk about faith, the consequences, faith deletion. You lose sight of the source. When grind becomes God, gratitude dies. You forget execution flows through you, not from you. You start hustling to survive instead of listening to design. Woo! You mistake performance for alignment and miss the divine correction. God will reposition you if you just but Let him do it. But you can't because you still got your hands on the keyboard. You can't leave the block in the corner. Your radius for success is like a square mile. System deletion. You vanish when you're not present. Your business doesn't run. Your network forgets you. Your mission needs CPR every morning. You became the product instead of the architect. And when your effort stops, so does your legacy. Hear me. Hear me. Hear me. Those are consequences. And then stop hearing me and hear you. Listen to yourself. How do we take ownership? Let's call this the tactical alignment triad. Let's start with the self. There's an energy multiplier protocol. Here we go. Identify one daily task that drains you but adds nothing long term. I'm sure you got a lot of those. Then cut it and batch it with boundaries. Replace it with one energy compounding habit. For example, active rest. Just rest. Watch what happens when you start to rest. Skill stacking and movement. Every action must produce future ROI, return on investment. Faith fix. Alignment before assignment audit. Before you touch it, ask, did God assign this or am I building from fear? Then trade one fear-based action for a faith-based command you've been ignoring. What is God telling you to do? Where is he telling you to move? You don't scale systems by grinding. You scale through grace-backed design. Faith don't wait. Doubt deletes the code. System fix. The sustainability scan. Choose one function that relies 100% on you. Either delegate it to person or process, right? Automate it, eliminate it. If it doesn't survive without you, it was never meant to scale. Think about that. And then let's challenge ourselves. Now, as part of the challenge, we want to be able to audit, take control, and then report back. Today's system war cry is simple. Audit. Where are you grinding instead of building? What process are you touching that God never told you to carry? Many processes, including the network of people. Some people got to be dropped. Get them off your back. Then take control. Cut one toxic effort. Delegate or automate one bottleneck. Replace one fear task with a faith task. Get up early on purpose and move somewhere. Then report back. Drop a one-liner. Let us know what you released. I released X. I'm aligned. Execution done. Consider this your accountability trail. No more running blind. No more holy hustle lies. If your hustle is hostile, you're lying to yourself. 4:40 a.m. on a Sunday. If it wasn't clear, here it is. You don't get points for disobedience just because you worked hard. God doesn't reward chaos, especially when it's dressed up as commitment. Remember Uzzah? He reached out thinking he was saving the mission. But God didn't ask for saving. He asked for obedience. And some of you, you're touching things God never told you to carry. You're calling it help, but it is fear in disguise. Let me make this abundantly clear. If your hustle is hurting your faith, if your grind is glorifying fear, if your motion is masquerading as purpose, you are not honoring your calling, you're interfering with it. So here is the order, straight and divine. Stop touching what was never yours to hold. Stop carrying what God already claimed. Stop grinding like God needs your help. Because when God builds something, he don't need your panic. He needs your posture. Your obedience is your access. Your alignment is your honor and your faith. Your faith. That is your fire. So fall back, let God forward. Stop trying to prove your worth with performance. You don't need to earn the system. You need to run it. Because when you're truly aligned with the divine, when you reach the root source, level 4, you don't grind, you don't beg, you don't break. You move with command. You execute with certainty. You scale in God's name without touching what ain't yours. So now say this with me out loud and never forget it. You either run the system or the system runs you. Change your mind, change your life. I am who I say I am. Do you and stay rich.